They say success is the best revenge, but I discovered something even more satisfying. Watching your enemies destroy themselves with the very weapons they used against you. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and this is the story of how I turned my colleague's betrayal into the most spectacular professional downfall I've ever witnessed. I'm 38 years old, a senior marketing manager at Pinnacle Dynamics, one of the largest consulting firms in the Northeast. For the past 8 years, I've built campaigns that have generated over $50 million in new business for the company. My specialty is strategic brand positioning for Fortune 500 companies, taking established brands and helping them navigate major market transitions or reputation crises. The story begins with the promotion that should have been mine. After leading the most successful campaign in the company's history, a complete brand overhaul for a major telecommunications company that resulted in a 30% increase in market share, I was the obvious choice for the newly created director of strategic marketing position. It was the promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years, the natural next step in my career progression. My closest colleague, and the person I thought was my friend, was Jessica Chin. We'd started at Pinnacle on the same day 8 years ago, fresh out of our respective MBA programs. We'd been through the trenches together, late nights, impossible deadlines, difficult clients, and office politics. We'd celebrated each other's successes and supported each other through setbacks. I trusted her completely, which turned out to be my biggest mistake. Jessica was talented, no question about that. She had a sharp analytical mind and was excellent at client relationship management. But she'd always been more focused on the relationship side of the business, while I specialized in the strategic and creative aspects. We complemented each other perfectly, which is why we often worked as a team on major accounts. The telecommunications campaign that should have secured my promotion was a perfect example of our collaboration. I developed the strategic framework, created the positioning concepts, and designed the implementation plan. Jessica managed the client relationships and handled the day-to-day project coordination. It was a textbook example of how our different strengths could combine to create exceptional results. When the campaign launched and exceeded all expectations, I assumed the recognition would be shared appropriately. The client was thrilled, our senior management was impressed, and industry publications were calling it a case study in successful brand transformation. I was already mentally preparing for the promotion announcement. That's when Jessica made her move. The first sign something was wrong came during the quarterly review meeting where our department's successes were being presented to the executive committee. I expected to be invited to present the telecommunications case study, since I'd developed the strategy and led the creative execution. Instead, Jessica was chosen to make the presentation. When I asked our department head, Robert Morrison, about the decision, he seemed surprised by my question. "Jessica's been the lead on that account from the beginning," he said. "She's the one who's been interfacing with the client and managing the strategic direction." I was stunned. Jessica had been managing client relationships, but I had been the strategic lead. I'd created the positioning framework, developed the messaging architecture, and designed the campaign execution. But somehow, in the months since the campaign's launch, the narrative had shifted. Jessica had become the strategic mastermind, while my role had been minimized to creative support. I realized that Jessica had been systematically rewriting the history of our collaboration. In client meetings I hadn't attended, she'd been positioning herself as the strategic architect of the campaign. In internal communications, she'd been subtle but consistent in taking credit for strategic decisions while attributing tactical execution to me. She'd been playing a long game, slowly shifting perceptions about who deserved credit for our shared successes. The promotion announcement came 2 weeks later. Jessica Chun was named Director of Strategic Marketing, effective immediately. The press release highlighted her innovative strategic thinking and her leadership of the award-winning telecommunications campaign. My name wasn't mentioned. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 8 years of hard work, the most successful campaign in company history, and I'd been completely erased from the narrative. Jessica had stolen not just my promotion, but my professional identity. She'd taken credit for my strategic thinking, my creative concepts, and my leadership. But what hurt most was the personal betrayal. This wasn't just a colleague competing for advancement. This was someone I'd considered a friend, someone I trusted with my ideas and my career aspirations. She'd been planning this theft for months, maybe years, using our friendship as cover while she systematically undermined my contributions. The morning after the promotion announcement, Jessica stopped by my office. She had the audacity to act sympathetic, suggesting that there would be other opportunities, and that she hoped we could continue working together effectively. She even offered to put in a good word for me when the next promotion opportunity arose. That's when I realized Jessica had made a critical error in judgment. She thought I was the kind of person who would accept this betrayal quietly, who would swallow my anger and continue to be a team player. She believed I was too professional, too conflict-averse, to fight back effectively. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I spent the next week conducting a thorough analysis of Jessica's new position and the expectations that came with it. As Director of Strategic Marketing, she would be responsible for developing strategic frameworks for all major accounts, leading creative concepting sessions, and presenting strategic recommendations to C-level executives. These were all areas where I had been the actual expert, while Jessica's strengths lay in relationship management and project coordination. In other words, Jessica had stolen a job she wasn't qualified to perform. She'd built her reputation on my strategic thinking, but now she would have to deliver that level of strategic insight independently. And I was going to make sure she failed spectacularly. The first phase of my plan was strategic withdrawal. Jessica had been relying on my ideas and strategic frameworks for years, often without realizing it. Our collaborative relationship had been so seamless that she'd internalized my strategic approaches as her own thinking. Now that she was in a position where she needed to generate original strategic insights, I was going to let her discover what she was actually capable of on her own. I stopped volunteering ideas in meetings where Jessica was present. When she asked for my input on strategic questions, I provided only basic, surface-level responses. I was polite and professional, but I was no longer the creative partner she'd been unconsciously depending on for years. The effect was immediate and obvious. Jessica's first few strategic presentations as director lacked the depth and innovation that had characterized our previous collaborative work. Her frameworks were generic, her insights were superficial, and her creative concepts were uninspired. She was competent, but she wasn't exceptional, and exceptional was what was expected from someone in her new role. But I wasn't content to simply watch Jessica struggle. I was going to actively demonstrate the difference between her capabilities and mine. I began developing strategic frameworks and campaign concepts for my own accounts that showcased the level of thinking Jessica had been taking credit for. I made sure these projects were visible to senior management, positioning them as examples of innovative strategic thinking that could be applied across the company's client base. At the same time, I started documenting everything. Every strategic framework I developed, every creative concept I generated, every innovative approach I designed. I made sure there was a clear record of my intellectual contributions. I was building a portfolio that would demonstrate my actual capabilities versus the narrative Jessica had constructed. The breakthrough came when Pinnacle was invited to pitch for the largest account in the company's history, a complete brand transformation for a major automotive manufacturer. This was the kind of high-stakes, high-visibility project that could define careers and determine the future leadership of the company. As Director of Strategic Marketing, Jessica was expected to lead the strategic development for the pitch. This was her opportunity to prove that her promotion had been justified, that she could deliver the kind of strategic thinking that had made the telecommunications campaign so successful. I knew she was going to fail because I knew she didn't actually possess the strategic capabilities she'd been credited with. But I wasn't going to leave her failure to chance. I was going to ensure it was complete and undeniable. The automotive manufacturer was looking for a completely new approach to brand positioning, something that would differentiate them in an increasingly crowded and competitive market. They wanted innovative thinking, creative risk-taking, and strategic frameworks that could guide a multi-billion-dollar transformation. Jessica spent weeks developing her strategic approach, working longer hours than I'd ever seen her work. She consulted with external strategists, hired expensive research firms, and even brought in specialized consultants. She was throwing everything she could at the problem, but she was missing the fundamental insight that would make the strategy compelling. Meanwhile, I was developing my own strategic framework for the automotive pitch. Not because I expected to present it, but because I wanted to demonstrate the level of thinking that was actually required for this kind of challenge. I was creating a masterpiece of strategic positioning that would serve as a stark contrast to whatever Jessica produced. 2 weeks before the pitch presentation, Jessica asked to meet with me privately. She looked exhausted and stressed, and for the first time since her promotion, she seemed uncertain about her abilities. "I could use your input on the automotive strategy," she said, trying to sound casual. "You always have interesting perspectives on positioning challenges." This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Jessica was finally acknowledging that she needed my strategic thinking, but she was trying to frame it as a casual consultation rather than admitting that she was in over her head. "I'm pretty swamped with my own projects," I replied, "but I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're the director of strategic marketing now. This is exactly the kind of challenge you were promoted to handle." I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized I wasn't going to bail her out. For the first time, she was going to have to deliver strategic thinking entirely on her own, and she was beginning to understand that she might not be capable of meeting the expectations she'd created. The pitch presentation was scheduled for a Friday morning, with the entire executive committee in attendance along with the client's senior leadership team. It was the kind of high-stakes presentation that could make or break careers. Jessica's presentation was professionally executed but strategically weak. Her positioning framework was generic, her creative concepts were safe and uninspired, and her strategic recommendations lacked the innovative thinking the client was looking for. She delivered it competently, but it was clear to everyone in the room that this was not the level of strategic insight they'd been expecting from Pinnacle's director of strategic marketing. The client's response was politely disappointed. They thanked Jessica for her work, but indicated that they were looking for more innovative thinking, more creative risk-taking, and more strategic depth. The presentation that was supposed to showcase Jessica's strategic leadership had instead highlighted her limitations. But I wasn't finished. The real masterstroke came during the Q&A session following Jessica's presentation. Robert Morrison, our department head, asked if anyone else had thoughts on alternative strategic approaches for the automotive challenge. This was my moment. I stood up and presented a completely different strategic framework, one that reframed the entire brand positioning challenge in terms of cultural transformation rather than market differentiation. Instead of trying to compete in the traditional automotive space, I proposed positioning the brand as a catalyst for changing how people think about transportation, mobility, and environmental responsibility. The framework was comprehensive, innovative, and immediately compelling. I presented it without slides, without preparation, speaking directly to the strategic challenges the client had outlined. I demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had actually been behind our previous successes, the thinking Jessica had been taking credit for. The room was silent when I finished. Then the client's CEO started asking detailed questions about implementation, market research, and rollout strategies. For 20 minutes, I engaged in the kind of high-level strategic discussion that Jessica should have been leading as Director of Strategic Marketing. The contrast was devastating. In the span of 30 minutes, it had become clear to everyone in the room who actually possessed the strategic capabilities that had been attributed to Jessica. The person who should have been leading strategic thinking for the company was sitting silently while a senior manager demonstrated the level of insight expected from a director. The client awarded Pinnacle the account, specifically requesting that I lead the strategic development. It was the largest contract in the company's history, and it had been won not by the director of strategic marketing, but by the person whose strategic thinking had been stolen and misattributed. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within a week, Robert Morrison asked to meet with me privately. He'd been reviewing the history of our department's successes and had started to notice patterns in the strategic work that had been attributed to Jessica. He'd also been hearing feedback from clients who specifically requested to work with me on strategic challenges. "I think there may have been some confusion about contributions and leadership on recent projects," he said carefully. "I'd like to understand better how the strategic development process has been working in our department." I provided a detailed account of my actual contributions to the projects Jessica had been credited with leading. I showed him the original strategic frameworks I'd developed, the creative concepts I generated, and the innovative approaches I'd designed. I documented the difference between strategic development and project management, and explained how those roles had been confused in recent performance evaluations. The evidence was overwhelming. Jessica had been an excellent project manager and client relationship coordinator, but the strategic thinking that had driven our department's success had been mine. She'd been promoted based on accomplishments that weren't actually hers. 2 months later, the organizational restructuring was announced. A new position was created, Vice President of Strategic Innovation, reporting directly to the Executive Committee. I was offered the role, along with a significant salary increase and equity participation in the company. Jessica's role was restructured as Director of Client Services, focusing on the relationship management and project coordination that were actually her strengths. It was a lateral move that removed her from strategic leadership while acknowledging her legitimate contributions to the company's success. But the real satisfaction came from watching Jessica's reaction to the restructuring. She finally understood that her theft of my promotion had been temporary, and that her inability to perform at the strategic level she'd claimed had been exposed. She'd gotten a taste of the recognition and authority she'd craved, only to discover that she couldn't actually deliver the results those positions required. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new corner office, leading strategic development for the company's most important clients. The automotive campaign I developed has become a case study in innovative brand positioning, and I'm regularly invited to speak at industry conferences about strategic thinking in brand transformation. Jessica is still with the company, doing excellent work in client services. We have a professional relationship that's cordial but distant. She never apologized for stealing my promotion, and I never directly confronted her about it. But we both understand what happened, and we both know that the truth eventually emerged. The promotion she stole from me turned out to be the catalyst for an even better opportunity. By forcing me to demonstrate my strategic capabilities independently, her betrayal actually accelerated my career advancement. I'm now in a position I might not have reached for several more years if she hadn't forced me to prove my worth so definitively. But the real lesson of this experience wasn't about career advancement or professional recognition. It was about the difference between taking credit and earning it, between managing perception and delivering results, between stealing opportunities and creating them. Jessica thought she could build a career on my strategic thinking, but strategic thinking isn't something you can steal. It's something you either possess or you don't. When she was finally forced to demonstrate those capabilities independently, the truth became undeniable. My revenge wasn't about destroying Jessica's career or humiliating her publicly. It was about ensuring that merit was recognized, that contributions were properly attributed, and that the person with the actual strategic capabilities was in the position to use them effectively. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. Jessica chose to steal credit rather than develop her own capabilities. She chose to build her reputation on someone else's work rather than on her own achievements. And when she was finally in a position where she had to deliver independently, those choices caught up with her. The promotion thief learned that you can steal recognition, but you can't steal competence. And in the end, competence always wins.